This is going to be a video about rooting fig cuttings and a couple of the different methods I use, trying to keep it as simple as possible, because if it's not simple, you're doing something wrong. Figs root easier than most plants. You don't need a lot of different things for it. You probably have most of the stuff at home already. There's only one or two things that I find super useful that I would recommend, but I have basically two different methods that I use for winter rooting. Summer rooting and spring rooting is much less elaborate, and how I would describe spring rooting is once it's above freezing outside, you can take a 12-inch pot, fill it with some decent soil, stick a bunch of fig cuttings in it, and you will get at least 50% success usually. Just keep it a little bit damp, don't overwater it. But winter rooting is a little bit more complicated, but not too complicated. This ProMix BX here is the soil I use most often. It's the one that I usually find at the best price point. Don't do something crazy like buy it off Amazon and pay $100 for the 3.8 cubic foot bales, but if you can get a good price on it, it's a good one to go with. ProMix HP is another good one. HP just has a little more perlite than BX, but they're all excellent soils. And if I couldn't find them for a reasonable price, and if they were going to be like $100, I would just go with something else. Walmart sometimes sells a organic ProMix that's like a cheaper version of ProMix. That one can be okay, or just generic seed starting mix, or anything similar would work. What I always start with is I start with ProMix BX, or whatever ProMix I can get for a reasonable price. This is what it looks like when it comes out of the bag. It's very light and fluffy. It is just perlite and peat moss combined, and then they buffer it to make the pH neutral, which is also important, and they add some mycorrhizal in it. And all of those things are the basis of what I'm looking for in a soil. I'm looking for something that doesn't have any sort of fertilizers. I don't want any organic fertilizers in it when I start rooting, because that can cause rot in the cutting, and you basically just want the rooting medium that's very lightly damp. That's one of the tricks to all the rooting, is you want the rooting medium to be lightly damp. You don't want it to be wet. You don't want it to be saturated. You don't want water sitting on the cutting in the medium. You want it to be able to be damp and then gradually dry out, and that sort of draws the roots out of the cutting. The two different methods I use most often are the fig pot method and the cup method. All of them I like to be clear, because I really like to see the roots as they develop. I like to know what I'm working with. I'm working with a cutting that has a bunch of leaves on it and one barely there root, or if it's absolutely filled with roots and it needs to be up potted. So the first one that's the most common is the cup method, and use something like a clear cup, and you could burn holes in the bottom of it with a soldering iron. I usually use a drill bit, and I just drill a bunch of holes in the bottom so that the cup drains water. You don't ever want water that you put in here to sit in here with the cup method. And that's for the cup method. For the fig pot method, I use these plastic bags. They are 4x10 in size for the smaller or normal size cuttings, and 5x12 in size for the larger, thicker cuttings. Here's an example. This one's a Hydrating Argentile that is nice and thick. It's more than a ½ inch thick, and that's a good size. And then the normal cuttings and the smaller ones, these are ones that I didn't use in my sale because they're a little funny shaped, or they're shorter than 8 inches. I usually in my cutting sale like to make everything about 8 inches, pencil width or thicker, and these ones didn't hit that. They were 6 or 7 inches, something like that. And so this is a Martirano here and a Hydrating Argentile. It also has like a little stub of the plant, which for me, that's fine. I usually don't send those ones out, but for me, that's fine. And I'm just gonna work with what I got here. I end up rooting most of the ones that I wouldn't sell, because that makes, you guys aren't gonna get upset that you got a funny looking cutting, and they root just as well for me. And then this is an example of a cutting that I wouldn't recommend trying to root. You can root them as scraps if you just want to test it out, and they do work a certain percentage of the time. It's super green. It's got, like if you squeeze it at the top, it has like a papery feel to it, and it gives a little bit too much. And that really bright green is also a giveaway that the cutting it's too green, and what happens is everything here and up is going to dry out. Now this cutting may still root if I root it, because it's a little bit more lignified at the bottom. You really want lignified cuttings. They don't have to be dark brown like this, but you don't want them bright green like this. So there's somewhere in between. Most things work The really light green is not great, and it will mostly die. It's the most recent growth. It's stuff that hasn't lignified off yet. So when I start with the soil, I start with a soil dry here. This soil is bone dry. There's no moisture added to it. And the biggest trick to all of these methods is I want to get the soil damp. I would describe the dampness as like if you had a sweatshirt on and you got it wet, but you squeezed it out and it wasn't wet anymore, but it had like that sort of damp feeling to it where there was still moisture in it. That's kind of what you want the soil to feel like. You don't want it to crumble so easily like that with no moisture in it, but you also don't want to squeeze it and have drops of water come out, because that means you put too much water in it. For a lot of my watering of plants, I really like to use these half-gallon containers, these half-gallon juice containers, and just like before, I drill some holes in the top of the half-gallon container, and then I can point it down and I can really direct what way the water goes and how much goes out. And I'll just do a little bit at a time and then mix it in. So I have enough soil in here to do at least 4 or 5 plants. Mix it around because I really don't want to get it soggy or soaking wet. I just want to keep adding some moisture. I don't do any measurements. I don't do any, 5-to-1 ratio of water to soil or anything like that. I wouldn't even know how to compare it, but you kind of just get the feel for it. And once it starts to clump together, it's getting there. This just needs a little more moisture. And for the fig pot method, that's one of the tricks, is you don't want there to be a lot of moisture in it. A lot of people that have problems, they have problems because I think sometimes they compare rooting cuttings in soil to rooting cuttings in water. Rooting cuttings in water, like a coleus plant or something like that, you think it needs to be saturated and just sitting in water, and that works for something like a coleus, but hardwood cuttings don't do well with that. They like to have moisture present, but they don't like to be soaking wet. They don't like to stay soaking wet. So they just need damp soil. And we're getting there. This should be just about enough. I haven't been using any rooting hormone lately, and last year I didn't use any. I don't think I used any the year before, but I've used them in the past. And if you're going to go ahead and use rooting hormone, I would suggest one of the gel-based ones. I like those, or something like the Dip and Grow that is a liquid. So I would suggest those if you're going to use rooting hormone. But for fig cuttings, you don't need to, and it almost adds another step. Takes a little bit of time. So I would suggest doing it without that. I would say you're aiming for, if you're doing it right, about an 80% success rate. And if you're new to it and you do pretty good, you can usually get 50 to 60% success rate. If you're way off of that, if you get like 1 out of every 10 cuttings roots, you're doing something wrong and you just want to figure out your process and what you're doing. So right now the soil is mixed up the way I like it. It's enough to hold together in a clump. It really doesn't look that wet. I might even add just a little bit more. So even that, so I only used about that much water in this entire tub here. So it's not a lot. And it's barely damp. And then the one that doesn't matter so much how you start out is the cutting that's going to go in the cup. Because the cup is going to need to be watered periodically, because water evaporates from the soil through the top of the cup. One of the other steps I like to do is I like to label all of the cuttings with a paint pen. And what that does is I still label the containers. When I'm done, I'll label the container to make sure that it is the variety that I'm looking for, and so that I don't forget what variety is. Because as soon as the name comes off it and you don't know what variety is, it is basically something you're going to get rid of, or you're going to mark as an unknown, and that's kind of a waste of time. So this is a Hative de Argentile, so I just labeled it HDA with a paint pen. And then one of the main steps that I do is I start with something called parafilm. It's a type of grafting tape. There's also something called buddy tape, which I use for grafting more. The buddy tape I like a little better for grafting, and the parafilm I like for rooting, although buddy tape would be fine for rooting too. It's just a little more expensive. And you want to get real parafilm. It's like a wax tape. How I would describe it is, when you go to pull a piece of it, it stretches weird. And if your tape doesn't do that, and then it's wrinkly when you're done, if it doesn't look like that and it doesn't do that, you're probably using some sort of cheap alternative or a plastic tape. And plastic tapes won't work for this. They'll hold in too much moisture and probably rot your cutting. So with the parafilm, I usually start at the top and I put my thumb on it. And the idea is I want to wrap anything that's out of the soil and then leave maybe a 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch gap, and then the rest of that's going under the soil. I don't want the parafilm to go all the way down the cutting. It'll block roots from coming out, and I don't want it to be below the soil level, because the parafilm will, if the soil's wet, wick moisture up the cutting and then start to rot the cutting. So I'll start at the top here, and I'll just hold my finger on it, and you've got to kind of stretch the parafilm as you wrap it. So you might take a couple tries, it might take some getting used to, and it goes over itself, and that's what keeps it on the cutting. This parafilm on the cutting will stay there for the next 4 or 5 months, maybe longer, and you don't really ever need to remove it. I get the question sometimes, should I remove the parafilm after, it roots? No, just leave it. It's fine. That's kind of the whole point of it, is that all of these buds that form here and will grow into branches, they will swell and they will push and rip through the parafilm. So you just leave them on there. And that's about as far as I'm going to wrap it. This does what a humidity dome would do. If you're using parafilm, you don't need to put a plastic bag over it. You don't need to put something to keep moisture in. The parafilm does all of it. So when I plant this, it's going to go right to here, about a 1/4 inch below the parafilm. Let's see. Let me get my plastic cup for the plastic cup method out. And the other step that I do is I usually just clip off right here. I just did it already on this top one, and the bottom piece I will clip off. You want to use sharp clippers. These Okatsune, I think they are, Japanese pruners. They're much sharper than the Felcos I used to use, so I am really liking them lately, and I would recommend these. They were also only I feel like $25 or something, pretty cheap. So hopefully they last, but they have been even sharper for me than the Felcos that I've been using for years. So now that I've clipped off the bottoms, I've wrapped it in parafilm, I'm going to basically find the level that I want it to be, which for me is about 1 inch or 2 off the bottom. You don't want it hanging out in the top there, and you don't want it touching the bottom. If you go too low with it, it can really sit on the heat mat too much, and that's not good. So you want it maybe 3/4 of the way down. And I will pre-fill a little soil in here. Okay, I'm not going to fill it all the way up yet. And I'll get it to the level I want it. And just pushing it down will kind of hold it in place, and then I'll backfill around it. Now, like I said, I don't want the soil level to touch the parafilm. I want the parafilm to stop a little bit before the soil level. And for the cup method, you do need to monitor them a bit more than you do with the bag method and the fig pot method. I'll straighten it out here. I don't want to push down too hard, but I don't want it to be too loose in there. Okay, and now this one is ready to go the way it is. I'm not going to water it like crazy and saturate it, but this one I'll give it a little more water to, because the water on this tends to evaporate. Once the cutting is all set in the pot here, you can see I have the soil level is about 1/2 inch from where the parafilm starts. And it's wrapped nice and tightly. It's not loose. It's tight enough that the cutting can still breathe in a way. It kind of breathes through the film, and it's like that waxy material, and the buds will push right through it. If it's too loose, they won't push through it. And that is most of setting up the cup method of rooting cuttings. So I'm going to move on from that one. The next one is the fig pot method, and I will start with the smaller and skinnier of the cuttings here. This is a Martorana, which was a really good variety for me this year. I was a big fan of it. It was first year getting fruit off of it, and it was really, really good. So this one here, I will sort of look for a similar sort of placement. I kind of want the cutting to be maybe 2 inches off the bottom. And then I want it, probably on this one there's several buds, so I want maybe 2 sticking out of the soil, 2 or more than that. And so I'm going to cut the bag down size-wise. So for this one, it's down to about there. I'll just take scissors. I'll cut right across the bag. If you don't have parafilm, you can just leave the bag all the way up, and that would work too. I find parafilm just works better. So on this one, I'm going to make sure it's clean and dry. That's another issue with parafilm, is you don't want to wrap anything with any moisture on it. So sometimes people will wash their cuttings. You can wash them with soap and water, but they really need to dry them after that. If you just go ahead and use the washed cutting and wrap it in parafilm, it's probably going to mold or rot. So this wasn't washed at all. This was just from my yard, and I wiped it off with a paper towel just to be able to get the paint pen writing on it. And I'm going to start at the top here again. Sometimes I won't wrap the very, very top bud, the apical bud there right at the end. And I'll start just below that, and I will pull it pretty tight around the other buds. And it sort of is like, you got to get used to the stretching of it. You hold the cutting with your finger, and then you pull it along as you rotate around. If you're doing a lot of these, it actually makes your hand pretty sore after a while, but it's worth it. Because then you don't need a humidity dome, you don't need anything to keep moisture into the cutting. So for this one, I'm not going to go down much further than that, just the top couple buds. And then at the very end, you want to wrap it over itself and pull it tight. That stretching is what gets the parafilm to really attach. So you could wave it around, it's not going to come off, and then, yeah, it won't come off for months now. So I've got the little fig pop bag here that I cut down to size. You can fill them however you want, but I sometimes use these canning jar things to fill them if I'm doing a lot of them. Just sort of hold it around there. Start dropping some soil in. People use all kinds of things. I've seen people use these scoops where you can sort of get the soil in there. With the fig pops, I don't want there to be wrinkles at the bottom. I want to sort of force them out. I'll get it pretty full. And I'm actually going to put this down. I'm gonna hold it here, and I'm going to tap it. Make a little bit of a mess, so it's one of the reasons I'm doing it outside. A couple more taps. If I find pieces of like sticks in the rooting medium, you can just take them out. It's not a big deal. Put a little more in there. I'm going to leave a little bit of room at the top. That little bit of room is so that I can get something around it to seal it. There's a couple options for that, I'll show you. So I got this here, and I'm going similar length as the other one, where I want it about there. And I want some room before I hit the parafilm. So most of the cutting needs to be wrapped in the parafilm, but not 100%. So right there, the fig pop bag, I'm going to have it look about like that. Push the soil down a little bit, and then I'm going to use whatever I'm going to use to cinch it shut. I have some zip ties here. Zip ties work. And then the other option I have are these like clothing ties. They're like the little beaded clothing tie things that I got off Amazon. Zip ties work just as well. So we got zip ties, and we got this little beaded plastic thing. I've been using these because they were super cheap, and I used them last year and they did well. So I'm gonna put this down right here. I'm gonna get this in here. Just start pulling it tight. It sort of ratchets shut, which I kind of like. And it's actually pretty weak. And that's one thing I do like about these things over zip ties, is that they're weak enough that they're so easy to clip off when you're done. So from there, I've got the label on the paint pen there, but I will also usually write on the bag. I'll probably write on both sides of the bag. And for labeling things, I really like to use a certain type of marker. I'll leave the markers in the description because they do well even if they get exposed to sunlight, and they don't wear off. Even the Sharpie Extreme and some of the Sharpie markers, they will wear off after 6 months or so outside or in the sun. And then after I get done with each fig pop, I'll usually put them in a container, something like this or smaller, because these are all going on a heat mat. The size, you kind of want it to fit right over the heat mat, and then I'm going to stack them together. If I get the soil pushed up against one another, it's nice. It kind of maintains more of the heat from the heat mat, and I like doing that. But yeah, I'll zoom in a little closer on this one. Just like the last one, there's a little bit of a gap between the soil and then the parafilm. If you miss a node, that's fine. You just don't want to wrap it all the way below the soil, or it will draw moisture up from the cutting. And this one here, it's very low moisture level in the fig pop. That's one of the tricks to doing them, and they're basically going to stay like that. I'm probably not going to give this any water for at least a month. And you're going to start to see roots before you're going to be watering this. And you really don't need to do too much watering on these fig pops until they start to form leaves. And then at that point, they will start drying out a bit. But this feels very light to me. This feels Like if I didn't know how much water I put in here, I would think there was no water in here. And that's okay. All right, so now we have this cup here. We've got that fig pop, and then I'll do one more fig pop just to show you something else. This one is a thicker cutting. For the thicker cuttings, it's tough to cut them with the clippers. I probably can do this with these clippers. Yeah, these clippers are really good. But sometimes when they get thick enough, I'll get out the Japanese pruning saw and just cut off the last inch or so. Saw them back and forth. It's very easy to cut yourself with these, so be careful. Okay, it gives it a very clean cut. And I'll do that on the other end too. Okay. All right, and for all of these, you want to look for the right location, the right orientation. So I label them in a way where I label them going this way. So to the right of the words is always facing down. But they have a leaf scar at the bottom. There's usually a wider leaf scar, and then there's something above it. Sometimes there's a little bud coming out above it, sometimes there's not. It's more obvious on some cuttings than others. This one, it's really obvious. There's the big circular leaf scar under, and then above the node, there is two little things sticking out, and those are the buds, leaf and fruit buds. So this one I'm going to do in the bigger fig pop bag. I figure out the size I want it to be. So I don't want it to be too high up off the heat mat. So probably right here would be good. So I'm going to cut this bag to right about here. The bigger bags I have to cut a little bit higher and leave a little more material so that I can still get something around them. And this one, just like the last ones, it was wiped off. I didn't soak this in bleach. I didn't do anything like that. Coming from my yard, I'm not worried. I'm mostly not worried about other contaminants on the outside of the fig. If you ever get any disease issues with it, it's going to be in the wood. It's going to be in the plant already. No matter how much you bleach it, it's not going to remove it. So, but a lot of times, just to be able to get the paint on it, I will scrub them a little bit with a paper towel just to dry it off. And that way I'm also not introducing too much moisture to it. I don't want to add a ton of moisture and then have the cutting rot. These ones that are thicker are a little more difficult to parafilm, but not really. You just kind of pull it across the top first and then wrap it around itself and then go back and forth. As you spin it, you want to make sure you get every part of it. And the top of the cutting is by far the most important part, and then the leaf scars are the next most important part, but I like to do the whole thing. I don't like to leave gaps until you get to the spot where it goes over the soil. So for this is only a 2-node cutting, and I don't really sell any 2-node cuttings. I try to go with 8-inch long cuttings and pencil or thicker and 3 nodes. So when I do prune trees, a lot of times I'll end up with some 2-node cuttings, and those ones are ones that I'll root. They work just fine, but I wouldn't sell them. Okay, this is about to the spot that I want to go. See, not quite halfway down, but close. And then for this one, I'll lay this down. I'm gonna get out my thing to help fill these bags. So pinch them around it. And then start dumping the very lightly moist soil in here. Give it some shakes. And then when it gets mostly full, oops, I'm gonna dump it on myself. No, when it gets mostly full, I'm gonna tap it on the end of the table. A little more, and that's kind of the perfect amount there. I want to leave an inch or two open at the top, and for these ones it's a little thicker, so I'm going to use something like a stick. This is a fig cutting. I'm going to make a little spot for this one to go in so I don't have to really push it in there too much. I'm going to keep going down until I get it to the right level I want, and this is where I'm going to want to sort of push it in. And from here I'll use the zip tie just to show something different for this one. Zip tie right around the soil level. You don't want to make the zip tie too tight if you do use zip ties. They're a little stronger than what I was using on the last one. be relatively tight, but not crazy tight. And then from there, I've already got the label in the paint pen, but I'm also going to label the sides of the bag. I want it to be relatively, I don't want the soil to slosh around in it. And then the best thing you can do for them now is basically just put them in where you're going to root them and leave them there and try not to touch them for a month. The next step of the rooting process is to take the cuttings you just made. So I got the 2 fig pops here and the one in the cup that I just did, and I'll put them in some kind of container. Sometimes it could just be like a small Amazon box or something like that, and I will put them on a heat mat. I would recommend a heat mat with a thermostat on it, and I would set that thermostat to where the soil level is somewhere in the low 80s. The ones with a thermostat come with a probe, and in that case you would push the probe into one of the cups in here. Usually you try and find the hot spot on the heat mat, and you push the probe down to about here. So it's at the level where the base of the cutting is going to be, and I would want that temperature to be somewhere in the low 80s. If it's hitting 100 degrees, it's probably going to kill your cutting and it's not going to work. If it's 65 degrees down there, it's going to take forever to root, if it roots at all. So I would recommend anywhere from the mid 70s to the mid 80s is really the best range for rooting cuttings. And that's it. So from there, you're just going to sort of wait on some roots to form, and then you'll know what to do from there. So when roots form on these ones here, the cut method, you got to water every once in a while, just a little bit of water at a time. But when roots start to form, and when you've got 3 or 4 leaves, then you can start thinking about watering them a bit more.